For some of you, this episode might stir something uncomfortable. It's not because of what it attacks, but more so because of what we're inviting. See, we're not diving into gore or violence. We're diving into the far more subtle discomfort of experiencing one who's waking up. You may find yourself perhaps tempted to tune out or to intellectualize or to think this doesn't really apply to me. If so, pause, breathe, because you're allowed to step away. But if you stay, I want you to know this. We're not going to only tell the truths about others, but also about ourselves. And that kind of truth, I think, has the power to free us if we let it. Most people aren't blind. They're just not really ready to see yet. So they scroll past the injustice. They laugh awkwardly at cruelty. They make excuses for manipulation. And it's not because they're monsters, but because truth, when it hits too close, feels more like a threat. It threatens their worldview, it threatens their identity, their comfort, and so it's easier to turn away. But turning away is not the same as ignorance. It's a choice. Sometimes conscious, sometimes it's unconscious, but a choice to keep believing what's easier instead of facing what's real. And that's what makes the 764 movement so resilient. It doesn't just hide in the dark, it thrives on people's reluctance to actually look. This episode is about that reluctance. See, it's not enough to point fingers at those people, the ones who, post the hate, the ones who spread the ideology, the ones who are openly celebrating despair. I think we have to ask harder questions, like, why don't more people speak up? Or why do so many good people pretend not to see what's right in front of them? Or why is denial so comfortable? And why is the truth so terrifying? It's because seeing has consequences. When you really see, not just with your eyes, but with your conscience, you're no longer innocent. You're now responsible. And most people are not prepared for that kind of responsibility. They haven't really built their inner structure that's required to hold what the truth demands. And it's not that they don't care, right? I think that they're scared that if they truly faced what's happening, like the exploitation, the grooming, the despair in plain sight, if they face that, they may break. They would unravel. They would no longer be able to function as they do now. And so they stay asleep with their eyes wide open. But what if the truth doesn't exist to destroy you, though? What if the truth exists to restore you? What if your capacity to see clearly is directly tied to your ability to live fully? See, that's what this episode is about. It's about preparing ourselves to see. Because courage is not something that you summon in the moment. Courage is something that you build in private, before the confrontation, or before that conversation, before, in essence, the collapse of the illusion. See, courage is what you cultivate when no one is watching, so that when the moment does come for you to see clearly, well, you're not blinking in that moment then. And this preparation isn't just abstract. It means that we're learning to tolerate discomfort. It means that now we're practicing honesty, not just honesty with others, but more so with ourselves. It means that we're building the emotional muscle to sit with something awful without running away, without numbing ourselves or becoming defensive. See, truth is a gift, but it's a heavy one. And if you're not ready to receive this gift, you'll reject it. And that's why so many people resist truth, not because they love lies, but because truth shows up faster than their nervous system was ever prepared to handle in the first place. And that's why this movement, the 764, that's what we're calling it, is so powerful. We want to build truth in a way that it helps us to face it. Because the people who have the most power to dismantle darkness are often not the loudest ones. They're the ones who have done the quiet work of preparing their hearts to see and in seeing not to turn away. Seeing the truth isn't just an intellectual event. It's actually an emotional disruption. See, we like to think of ourselves as these rational creatures that when we're presented with the facts, then we'll respond logically, right? I don't think that though that I don't think that's how humans work though. See, we don't just interpret information. We also feel it. We internalize it. We defend against it, and if it threatens our sense of self, ooh, then we feel it. And few things threaten us more than the truth that forces us to question who we've been or who we've allowed ourselves to become. And this is why people will cling to lies that hurt them before they'll accept any truth that can heal them. Because those lies, however harmful they are, feel familiar. They confirm the world that they already know. They don't just require transformation. They these lies don't demand that one has to change. But truth interrupts. It says that belief that you've held onto for years is incomplete. It says that comfort that you've made your home, it's hiding something far more painful. Truth says that silence that you thought was neutral, it's been costing you more than you realized. And that's why truth can feel so violent. It doesn't arrive politely. It rattles, it dismantles, it asks, are you ready to let this part of yourself go? And for most people, the answer, at least in the beginning, is no, hell no. This is the root of so much willful blindness around the movements like the 764. See, people sense something is wrong and they feel a disturbance, even if they can't quite articulate that feeling. But to follow that feeling or to look closer would definitely threaten something foundational to them. Because if the 764 movement is real, if this isn't just an isolated pain, but an organized ideology that's wrapped in loneliness and in anger and rage, if this is more than a fringe rhetoric that speaks more to cultural neglect, then people would have to change. And change is often expensive. They'd have to actually question how they've been raising their sons, for example. They'd have to confront the jokes that they laughed at in their earlier years. They'd have to maybe re-evaluate what masculinity was modeled for them. Or they would have to maybe speak up in rooms where once upon a time they just stayed quiet, perhaps even for years. And so instead of seeing clearly, people, I think, see more selectively. They say, it's not that bad. Or they say, it's just a few angry kids on the internet, right? Or they're just venting. Everyone needs a place to vent or to be heard, right? And in so doing, they buy themselves maybe another year of not having to confront their own role in this whole narrative or this whole story. But that comfort comes at a cost. Because while they're avoiding the truth, there are boys who are being groomed in plain sight. And pain is being weaponized, and loneliness is being monetized. And there's a whole generation of men who are being taught that their world is really their enemy, and the connection is a threat. See, the 764 movement, it doesn't need to scream to survive. It just needs you to keep looking away. So the question becomes, how do we begin to look without running? I think the answer isn't raw willpower. It's more so preparation. It's about slowly growing our capacity to hold discomfort without trying to numb it, to be able to sit in the complexity without resolving that immediately, or maybe to hear something that's painful without flipping into defensiveness or just shutting down. Because seeing clearly does not mean that we're agreeing with everything. It just, it doesn't mean that we're hating ourselves. It doesn't mean that we're abandoning our values. Seeing clearly means that we're having the courage to say, if something I believe or benefit from is harming others, I'm open to knowing about it. And that's not guilt. It's not about guilt. It's more so about agency and responsibility. It's not about self-condemnation, but more so about self-leadership. And that kind of strength, it doesn't come from the echo chambers. It really comes from the inner work that one can courageously face. The daily quiet practice of becoming someone who can be trusted with reality, even when it's hurtful. When people choose not to see, I think something in them starts to decay. And it's rarely obvious at first. See, life on the surface still functions, right? They go to work, they pay the bills, they keep the conversations light. But underneath all this, there's this quiet drifting away from alignment, away from one's wholeness, away from who they were meant to become. Because the soul cannot thrive in falsehood, even if the mind tries as hard as it can to pretend that it's a safer option. This is why avoidance never truly is neutral. See, when we look away from what's real, we don't just protect ourselves from the pain. We, in essence, are cutting ourselves off from any meaning at all. And slowly, this avoidance becomes a habit. And then it becomes a posture. And then eventually a personality. And people stop asking the hard questions then. They stop bringing curiosity to the conversations. And then they silence the whisper of their conscience in favor of discomfort. But eventually they'd become strangers to themselves. And that's what the refusal to see does. It fragments us from the inside out. And I think this shows up spiritually as numbness, a disconnection, if you will, from anything deeper or more substantial, whether that's faith or whether that's purpose or even your own intuition. You see, you stop trusting your gut just because your gut keeps telling you what you don't want to hear. And so it shows up relationally as well as defensiveness. And so you avoid the vulnerable conversations and you tend to bristle at critique. And you keep things, again, surface level, even with the people that you deeply love. Because you're terrified that they might name something that you've worked very hard to try keep buried. And it shows up culturally as well as disengagement. This is where you start to believe your voice does not really matter and that the world is too broken to fix. That calling something out won't change anything at all. And in that resignation, the harm continues to multiply. See, this is the cost of refusing to see, and that is that you lose your aliveness, you lose your depth, you lose that very thing that makes love possible. And that's why preparing to see really matters. Because seeing is not just about punishment. No, seeing is more about being present in that moment. You can't love what you're not willing to look at, right? And you can't change what you're not willing to actually name. And you can't be free if you keep pretending that the change don't exist. And here's where the tragedy becomes this collective. You see, entire families and communities and institutions have in essence been shaped by this refusal to see. Entire generations of men have been taught that shielding themselves from truth is really to be considered a strength. That stoicism means denial, and that leadership means never admitting any faults. And so the harm repeats, because no one is willing to be the first to say, I see that. And here's what's even more powerful. When someone does say it, Well, when even one person in the room finds the courage, if you will, to see and then name what's happening, well, then everything begins to shift, right? It's like opening a window in a room that has been sealed shut for many years. And all of a sudden you have this light that's flooding in, and the air dynamic changes and becomes fresher, and the silence all of a sudden breaks. And then suddenly what was invisible becomes undeniable. That's the power of truth. It doesn't just change your perception, it actually changes what becomes possible. Here at Uber Vintagers, my mission is to help men build their inner life that's necessary to carry that kind of truth with grace. Because seeing without compassion leads to cruelty. But seeing with integrity, I think that leads to change. And this isn't about looking for what's wrong everywhere we're going. It's more about no longer pretending not to notice when something is happening. It's about choosing to stay awake, even when sleep would be far easier. It's about staying grounded, even when avoidance would be far more convenient. It's about staying aligned, even when the truth makes things harder before it makes it better. Because the moment that you choose to see is, is the moment that you begin to become trustworthy. And this world is starving for trustworthy people. See, truth doesn't just ask you to notice, it asks you to change. And that kind of change doesn't just happen. It's not a spontaneous event. It happens when we've actually built something inside of ourselves, and that's this capacity to carry what truth demands. The world does not need more men who in essence are flinching at reality. It needs men who are anchored enough to face that truth. Not because they are fearless, but more so because they've practiced how to face that truth. So, what does this practice look like? What does it mean to prepare ourselves to see? I think this is where we start to, well, it starts maybe with slowing down. See, in a world that rushes to react, preparation asks us to pause or to sit with the discomfort instead of trying to immediately solve it, to listen beyond the defensiveness, or to let an idea challenge us before we are wanting to just shut her down. Preparation also looks like curiosity. See, instead of assuming that we already know what's real, we learn to start asking deeper questions. We, we question our own instincts. We question our own assumptions. We even question who benefits when we believe what we believe. See, this is not about dismantling your identity. It's more about grounding your identity in something that's deeper than performance or pretense. And above all, preparation looks like community. You cannot do this alone. You, you need voices that will stretch you. You need people who will mirror you. You need these circles where truth isn't just tolerated, but where it's actually treasured. Because the courage to see is fragile when it's isolated. But when it's shared, it becomes something unstoppable. There's, there's a reason that movements like 764 grow in the secret, because they rely on isolation, on silence, on people not comparing notes, and especially on people who refuse to speak up. But truth grows in the open. It spreads through presence, and it becomes culture when enough people commit themselves to seeing clearly and then acting accordingly. So my invitation today is rather simple, but it's not easy though. Let's build structures that can actually carry truths, the ones that we want to claim for ourselves. And then don't wait for the moment of confrontation. Like, instead, start preparing now. Because when the time comes, and it will come, you'll be asked to choose. Are you going to choose comfort or clarity? Are you going to choose image or integrity? Denial or alignment? And how you respond won't be determined by the heat of the moment. It will be more so determined by the habits that you've cultivated in quiet. See, at Uber Vintagers, I've committed to helping men become the kind of men whose hearts don't shatter when the truth is spoken. Because they've been living with their eyes intentionally open all along. And it's not because it's easy, but more so because it's right. Because integrity matters far more than comfort. And because intimacy begins where denial ends. And also because love, like real love, cannot grow in the dark. So if you're listening to this with a quiet pain in your chest, wondering if it's maybe too late to start seeing clearly, it's not too late. Start now. Start by telling the truth about where you've locked yourself away. Start by building those muscles that will let you hold what's hard without collapsing. Start by becoming a man who can actually see, and in so doing, will not flinch. See, the courage to see is really the beginning of every kind of freedom, I believe. And you don't need to be fearless. I think all you need is just to be willing. Thank you, my dear listener, for listening. Let me know in the comments how this episode landed with you. I will see you in the next episode.